The snow fell like judgment from a darkened sky. 3 years ago, on a night much like this one, Calen Blackwood had commanded 500 warriors. He had worn the silver crown of the Northern Kingdom. He had believed, with the absolute certainty of a man who had never truly failed, that power and righteousness were the same thing. Now he stood alone on a frozen mountainside, wrapped in furs stained with old blood, watching the same moon that had witnessed his greatest shame. The memory came unbidden, as it always did when winter tightened its grip on the land. He remembered the intelligence reports, verified by 3 separate sources: a rival pack conspiring with rogues to attack the northern border, women and children being moved to a hidden location, warriors gathering in secret. Every sign pointed to imminent betrayal. Calen had studied the maps until his eyes burned. He had planned the assault with the precision that had made him legendary among the wolf packs. 3 strike teams, coordinated timing, no escape routes left unsealed, the kind of overwhelming force that would end the threat permanently and send a message to anyone else who might consider challenging northern sovereignty. His generals had praised the strategy. His advisors had called it necessary. Old Brennan, his most trusted counselor, had hesitated only once before nodding his approval. The attack had been flawless. 500 wolves descended on the settlement in perfect formation. Calen himself led the central assault, his silver eyes blazing in the darkness, his blades singing through the night air. Resistance crumbled within minutes. Victory was absolute. And then dawn came. Calen could still feel the exact moment when triumph curdled into horror. He had walked through the burning settlement, expecting to find weapons caches and war councils. Instead, he found cooking pots still warm on cold hearths, children's toys scattered in doorways, an old woman clutching a half-finished blanket she had been knitting for a grandchild who would never be born. 200 dead, not warriors, not conspirators, families, innocents, people whose only crime was living in a place that someone had decided to mark for destruction. The intelligence had been wrong. No, not wrong. False. Deliberately, catastrophically false. Fed to him through channels he had trusted, verified by sources that had been compromised. Someone had wanted this massacre to happen. Someone had known exactly what kind of king Calen was, the kind who acted decisively, the kind who trusted his information, the kind who would carry the weight of innocent blood for the rest of his life. Brennan had found him kneeling in the ashes, surrounded by bodies, his blade still dripping. "Your Majesty." Brennan's voice had been gentle, the voice of a man who had served 3 generations of the Blackwood line and had never seen any of them brought so low. "This was not your fault. The information." Calen had not let him finish. "I gave the order. I led the attack. I swung the blade." His voice had been hollow, emptied of everything that had once made him a king. "A ruler does not blame others for his own decisions. These people are dead because I chose to believe what I wanted to believe, because acting felt better than waiting, because I was so certain of my own righteousness that I never considered I might be wrong." He had stood then, and Brennan had stepped back, seeing something in his king's eyes that frightened even a man who had witnessed decades of war and politics. "The crown stays here." Calen had removed it slowly, that circle of silver that had rested on Blackwood brows for 12 generations. He placed it on the ground among the dead, a king's ransom abandoned in the blood and ashes of his failure. "I am no longer fit to wear it. Your Majesty, please, the kingdom needs a ruler who does not murder innocents." His voice had cracked on the last word. "Tell them I am dead. Tell them whatever you wish. But I will not return to that throne until I have earned the right to sit upon it again, if such a thing is even possible." He had walked into the mountains that night, leaving behind everything he had ever been: crown, kingdom, name, purpose. He had walked until his legs gave out, then crawled until his arms failed, then lay in the snow waiting for death to claim him as it should have claimed him instead of those 200 souls. But death had not come. The goddess, in her cruelty or her wisdom, had denied him that escape. 3 years. 3 years of exile in the frozen peaks where even wolves feared to hunt. 3 years of solitude broken only by the howling wind and the screaming of his own conscience. 3 years of learning that guilt does not diminish with time. It only settles deeper into the bones, becomes part of the architecture of the self, until a man can no longer remember what it felt like to be whole. Calen had aged a decade in those 3 years. His dark hair was now streaked with gray. His face, once handsome in the sharp-featured way of northern nobility, had become gaunt and weathered. Only his eyes remained unchanged, silver as moonlight, silver as the crown he had abandoned, silver as the blade he still carried but had sworn never to use in anger again. He survived because survival required no decisions. Hunt, eat, sleep, repeat. The simple rhythms of an animal existence, stripped of meaning or ambition. He spoke to no one because there was no one to speak to. He thought of nothing because thinking led inevitably to remembering, and remembering led to the faces of the dead, and the faces of the dead led to a darkness from which there was no return. Sometimes, in the depths of that darkness, he would remember his grandmother, Lady Moira Blackwood, who had died when he was 12 years old. She had been different from anyone else in the royal court, quieter, more watchful. She would look at people as if she could see something beneath their skin, something invisible to everyone else. And sometimes, when they were alone, she would tell him strange things. "You have a destiny, Kaelin." Her voice had been soft but certain. "One day, you will meet someone who carries a gift too precious for this world. Your purpose will be to protect her, to shield her from those who would corrupt her gift, to help her use it for the betterment of our kind." He had been too young to understand, had dismissed her words as the ramblings of an old woman whose mind was beginning to wander. But she had gripped his hand with surprising strength and made him promise. "Promise me you will remember. Promise me that when the time comes you will not turn away." He had promised. And then she had died, and he had grown into a king, and the promise had faded into the background of a life filled with more immediate concerns. Now, standing alone on a frozen mountainside, he wondered if she had known, if somehow, impossibly, she had seen this future, the fall, the exile, the emptiness that waited at the end of pride. But such thoughts were dangerous. They led to hope, and hope was a luxury he could no longer afford. This was his penance. This was his prison, a cage built not of iron bars but of memory and shame, and he had accepted it, made peace with it, as much as such peace was possible. He would live out his remaining years in this frozen solitude, and when death finally came for him, perhaps the goddess would judge that he had suffered enough. Perhaps she would grant him the oblivion he craved. That had been the plan, until tonight. The sound came from somewhere below his position, not the wind, not the natural settling of snow on stone. Something else, something alive and in distress. Kaelin's first instinct was to ignore it. He had trained himself over 3 years to suppress the impulse to help, to intervene, to act. Acting was what had led to catastrophe. Intervention meant involvement, and involvement meant caring, and caring meant pain. But the sound came again, a voice this time, weak, female, words too faint to make out but the tone unmistakable. A plea for help. "Walk away." The voice in his head was cold and certain. "It is not your concern. Whatever happens to them is not your responsibility. You have learned that lesson well enough." He stood motionless for a long moment, the snow accumulating on his shoulders, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Every rational part of his mind screamed at him to turn around, to return to his cave, to maintain the isolation that was both his punishment and his protection. And yet, his grandmother's voice echoed in his memory. "Promise me that when the time comes you will not turn away." The sound came a third time, weaker now, fading. Kaelin found himself moving before he consciously decided to move. His feet carried him down the slope, navigating the treacherous terrain with the sure-footedness of long practice. His eyes scanned the darkness, his wolf senses extending outward, searching for the source of that desperate voice. He found her in a small depression where the wind had carved a hollow in the snow. A young woman, barely more than a girl, curled around herself in a futile attempt to retain warmth. She wore a thin dress that might have been white once, but was now stained with blood and dirt. Her feet were bare. Her dark hair was matted with ice. She was pregnant, very pregnant, 6 months along at least, perhaps more, and she was dying. Kaelin knelt beside her, and his hand reached out almost of its own accord to check for a pulse. It was there, but barely, fluttering like a wounded bird. Her skin was blue with cold, and her breath came in shallow gasps that seemed to cost her tremendous effort. Her eyes opened, dark eyes, almost black in the moonlight, filled with a terror that went beyond the physical danger she faced. "Please!" The word was barely a whisper. "Do not let them find me." "Who?" Kalen heard himself ask. "Who is chasing you?" But her eyes had already closed again, consciousness slipping away like water through grasping fingers. He should leave her. The thought was clear and logical. She was a stranger. Her problems were not his problems. Getting involved meant making decisions, and his decisions killed people. But as he looked at her, at the small form curled desperately around the life growing inside her, something shifted in his chest, a crack in the ice he had built around his heart. If he left her here, she would die. The baby would die. Not because of some intelligence failure or military miscalculation, but simply because he chose to walk away. That would be a different kind of murder. Cleaner, perhaps. Less blood on his hands in the literal sense. But murder nonetheless. And he realized in that moment that he was not capable of it. Whatever else he had become in these 3 years of exile, whatever else the guilt had burned out of him, he was not yet the kind of creature who could watch an innocent die and do nothing. His grandmother had asked him to remember, had made him promise not to turn away. He gathered her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, this girl with her swollen belly and her frozen feet. He held her against his chest and felt the faint rhythm of her heart matching time with his own. "No one," he said quietly, as much to himself as to her, "will touch you again." The cave was not far. He had chosen its location carefully 3 years ago, selecting a place that was sheltered from the worst of the weather while remaining defensible against predators, both animal and otherwise. A small fire burned perpetually in a ring of stones, fed by a cache of dried wood he had spent months accumulating. Furs lined the floor. It was not comfortable by any civilized standard, but it was warm and dry and safe. He laid her on the furs near the fire and set about the business of saving her life. First, the wet clothing. He removed it with clinical efficiency, keeping his eyes focused on the task rather than the body he was uncovering. He had been a commander. He had tended wounded soldiers. He knew how to set aside the personal in service of the practical. He wrapped her in dry furs, then heated water over the fire, and prepared a mixture of herbs he had gathered during the warmer months. Nothing sophisticated, just simple remedies that any wolf who had spent time in the wild would know. But they would help with the cold and the shock. He worked through the night, checking her temperature, adjusting the furs, feeding her sips of warm liquid when she stirred enough to swallow, watching for signs that the baby had been affected by the exposure. By dawn, the crisis had passed. Her color had improved. Her breathing had deepened into something resembling natural sleep. The baby moved in her belly, small kicks and shifts that indicated continued life. Kalen sat back against the cave wall and watched her sleep. He had not been this close to another person in 3 years, had not spoken to anyone, touched anyone, cared about anyone's survival but his own in all that time. The experience felt strange, foreign, like putting on clothes that no longer fit properly. Who was she? Where had she come from? What had driven her into the wilderness in the dead of winter, pregnant and alone? The questions circled in his mind, but he pushed them away. It did not matter. As soon as she was strong enough to travel, he would point her toward the nearest settlement and send her on her way. A few days of shelter, some food for the journey, then back to his solitude. That was the plan. She woke near midday, her eyes opening slowly, adjusting to the dim light of the cave. Kalen saw the moment when memory returned, the flash of panic, the instinctive curl of her body around her belly, the wild searching of her gaze for threats. Her eyes found him across the fire, and he watched her take in his appearance. The scars, the gray in his hair, the furs and the isolation and the general air of a man who had stepped outside the boundaries of normal society. He waited for the fear. It usually came when people saw him now. He had cultivated a certain presence over the years, a deliberate harshness designed to discourage interaction. Most would have fled from the cave immediately, preferring the dangers of the winter wilderness to the company of this scarred and silent stranger. But she did not flee. Instead, something shifted in her expression. The fear remained, but it was joined by something else: calculation, assessment. The look of someone who had learned to evaluate threats quickly and accurately because their survival depended on it. "You saved me." Her voice was stronger than it had been the night before, though still rough with exhaustion. "Why?" The question should have been simple to answer. Because you were dying. Because I could not walk away. Because some part of me, despite everything, still believes that lives have value. But the words stuck in his throat. He was not accustomed to explaining himself anymore. You were dying, he said finally. It seemed unnecessary to allow. She studied him for a long moment. You live here alone. It was not a question. Yes. For how long? 3 years, give or take. Why? Because I am not fit for the company of others. His voice was flat. Because every decision I make brings suffering to those around me. Because the world is better off with me removed from it. She absorbed this without apparent judgment. What did you do? The question hung in the air between them. Kaylin could have refused to answer, could have told her it was none of her concern, could have retreated into the silence that had become his natural state. Instead, he found himself speaking. I murdered 200 innocent people. I believed I was protecting my kingdom. I was wrong. The words came slowly, pulled from some deep place he had thought permanently sealed. I was a king once. Now I am what remains after a king's pride destroys everything he swore to protect. Her eyes widened slightly at the word king, but she did not interrupt. He continued despite himself. I was given false intelligence. A rival pack planning an attack. I acted without sufficient verification. I was so certain of my own judgment that I never considered the possibility of manipulation. By the time I realized the truth, it was too late. Women, children, elders, all dead because I was too arrogant to wait, too proud to doubt. The fire crackled between them. Outside, the wind howled its eternal song of winter and isolation. You exiled yourself. Her voice was soft now, not accusatory, almost understanding. It was the only justice I could offer. Kaylin's silver eyes met her dark ones. The only way to ensure I would never have the power to make such a mistake again. She was silent for a long moment, then she said something that caught him completely off guard. Monsters do not exile themselves. Monsters do not spend 3 years alone in the mountains, torturing themselves with guilt. Only a man with a conscience punishes himself so thoroughly. He stared at her. No one had ever suggested such a thing. In his own mind, he was the villain of the story, the cautionary tale that other rulers would tell their children. Look what happens when power goes unchecked. Look what pride and certainty can lead to. You do not know what you are talking about, he said roughly. Perhaps not. She shifted carefully, mindful of her belly. But I know something about being condemned for things that were not your fault. I know something about being cast out by people who should have protected you. There was a weight to her words that made him pause. What happened to you? He asked. She looked at the fire rather than at him. My pack cast me out. The Alpha's son, the man who had promised to mate me, declared me a traitor before the entire assembly. He said I had been unfaithful, that the child I carry was proof of my dishonor. And was it? Kaylin asked quietly. Were you unfaithful? Her jaw tightened. I was attacked. During a hunt 3 months before I realized I was pregnant. I tried to tell them, tried to explain, but the Alpha's son did not want to hear it. Admitting that someone under his protection had been violated would have meant admitting he failed in his duty. It was easier to blame me. Kaylin felt something cold and sharp twist in his chest. They threw you out for being a victim. They threw me out for being inconvenient, for forcing them to confront a truth they did not want to face. She finally looked at him. Is that so different from what happened to you? You were betrayed, used, made to bear the weight of someone else's scheme. And instead of investigating, instead of seeking the truth, you accepted all the blame yourself. He had never thought of it that way. The intelligence was false, he said slowly. Someone wanted me to attack those people. Yes, I never found out who. After it happened, I could not bear to remain long enough to investigate. I assumed my own failures were the root cause, that if I had been more careful, more patient, I would have seen through the deception. And so you punished yourself for being deceived, rather than hunting down the deceiver. The words landed like blows. 3 years of exile, 3 years of self-flagellation, 3 years of assuming he was the author of his own destruction. And this young woman, this pregnant exile who had known him for less than a day, had just suggested that perhaps the story was more complicated than he had allowed himself to believe. What is your name? He asked. Elara. She pulled the furs tighter around herself. And I already know yours, Kaylin Blackwood. The scar on your chest gave you away, the mark of the Northern Royal line. His hand moved unconsciously to the V-shaped scar that lay beneath his furs, branded into his flesh at birth, as all Blackwood heirs were branded, a mark he had forgotten that others might recognize. You should be afraid, he said. If you know who I am, you know what I have done. I know what you have done, but I also know what you did last night." She touched her belly gently. "You could have left us to die. Most would have. Instead, you carried a stranger through the snow and spent the night keeping her alive. That is not the action of a monster." Kaelin had no response to this. The contradiction she pointed out was real, but he had no framework for understanding it. He had organized his entire existence around the premise of his own guilt. Without that foundation, he did not know who he was. The days that followed established a careful rhythm. Alara was too weak to travel, and Kaelin did not push her. He told himself it was merely practical. The weather was too severe. She needed to regain her strength. The baby required more stability before undertaking a difficult journey. But there was another truth beneath the excuses. He was grateful for the company, not in any way he could easily articulate, simply that her presence in the cave made the silence less absolute. Her questions, irritating as they sometimes were, forced him to think in ways he had abandoned years ago. She asked about his past, not the massacre, but before. His childhood in the Northern Kingdom, his training as a warrior, his rise to the throne after his father's death, the campaigns he had led, the alliances he had forged, the enemies he had defeated. As he spoke, he heard his own story differently than he had heard it in years. Not as a tale of inevitable failure, but as something more complex. A young king thrust into power before he was ready, a man trying to protect his people in a world full of threats, a leader who made countless decisions, most of them sound, until one catastrophic error overshadowed everything else. Alara listened without judgment. She asked clarifying questions. She pointed out patterns he had missed in his own behavior. She did not excuse what he had done, but neither did she condemn him with the totality that he condemned himself. In return, she told him about her life before exile, the Silver Fang Pack, one of the largest in the Southern Territories, her position as an Omega, valued for her abilities as a healer, and her unexpectedly strong senses. Her relationship with Darius, the Alpha's son, who had courted her for 2 years before everything fell apart. When she spoke of Darius, her voice carried a complexity that Kaelin recognized. Not hatred, though she had every right to hate. Not love, though she had clearly loved him once. Something in between. The tangled residue of a bond that had been severed badly, leaving jagged edges that had never properly healed. He did not believe me. Her words were quiet on the 4th night, as the fire burned low and the wind screamed outside. He looked into my eyes and chose to believe that I had betrayed him rather than face the truth that he had failed to protect me. Perhaps he was afraid. Kaelin spoke slowly, surprised at his own impulse toward generosity. Sometimes fear makes cowards of men who would otherwise be brave. Perhaps. She stared into the flames. But fear does not excuse cruelty. He could have investigated, could have given me a chance to prove my innocence. Instead, he announced my banishment in front of the entire pack, called me a whore and a liar, had me dragged to the gates and thrown into the snow. Like me, Kaelin's voice was barely audible, running from a truth too painful to face. She looked at him sharply. "You are not the same." "Are we not?" We both chose the easier path. I fled into the mountains rather than confront the possibility that I had been manipulated. He sentenced you rather than confront the possibility that he had failed to protect you. Different circumstances, same cowardice. Alara was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. "The difference is that you recognize your cowardice. You have spent 3 years facing it, every single day. That is its own kind of courage. The courage to sit with your failures rather than bury them." Kaelin had no response, but something in his chest shifted again. A second crack in the ice. On the 6th day, the hunters came. Kaelin sensed them before they arrived. 6 wolves, moving with the particular arrogance of young warriors who had never faced a real challenge. They were tracking Alara's scent, following a trail that should have gone cold days ago, but had somehow remained viable through the storms. He rose from his position near the cave entrance and took stock of the approaching threat. Their formation was sloppy. The leader stayed too far ahead of his pack, eager to prove himself. The flankers failed to maintain proper spacing. There was no rear guard. Amateurs, dangerous in numbers perhaps, but undisciplined. "Stay inside," he told Alara. "Do not come out no matter what you hear." "What are you going to do?" "What is necessary." He walked out into the snow to meet them. The wolves shifted to human form as they reached the clearing before the cave. Young men, All of them. The oldest could not have been more than 25. They wore the silver armbands of the Silver Fang Pack, and their faces held the smugness of those who believed they were on the right side of history. "Where is she?" The leader stepped forward, his dark hair slicked back from a face that might have been handsome if not for the cruelty in his eyes. "The traitor. We know she is here." Kaelin stood perfectly still. "There is no one here but me. We tracked her scent to this location." The leader's lip curled. "She cannot have gone far. Hand her over and we might let you live, old man." "Old man?" Kaelin almost smiled. He was 43 years old, barely middle-aged by wolf standards. But 3 years of hard living and harder guilt had aged him beyond his years. He supposed he did look old to these children. "I told you." His voice was flat. "There is no one here." The hunters exchanged glances. A silent communication passed between them, the kind of wordless coordination that pack life bred into wolves from birth. The leader nodded, and 2 of the hunters began to circle toward the cave entrance. Kaelin moved. He had not fought in 3 years, had not raised his blade in anger or defense since the night he walked away from his kingdom. But some skills, once mastered, do not fade. The muscle memory remained, the tactical awareness remained. The instincts that had made him one of the most feared warriors in the Northern Territories remained. The 2 flankers went down before they had taken 3 steps. Kaelin did not kill them. He struck with precision, targeting joints and nerve clusters, disabling rather than destroying. They collapsed into the snow, writhing in pain, but alive. The remaining 4 attacked simultaneously. Kaelin flowed through them like water through stones. He had no blade drawn, using only his hands and his knowledge of wolf anatomy. A strike to the throat silenced one. A knee shattered another's stance. The third caught an elbow to the temple that dropped him instantly. The leader was the last standing. He snarled and shifted to wolf form, launching himself at Kaelin with fangs bared and claws extended. Kaelin stepped aside, let the momentum carry his attacker past, then caught him by the scruff and slammed him into the ground with enough force to drive the air from his lungs. Before the young wolf could recover, Kaelin was on top of him, one knee pressed into his spine, one hand gripping his throat. "Listen carefully." Kaelin's voice was the voice he had once used to command armies. Low, calm, absolutely certain. "The woman is under my protection. You will return to your pack and inform them of this. If anyone comes for her again, I will not be so gentle." He released his grip and stood back. The leader scrambled to his feet, shifting back to human form, his eyes wide with a fear he had clearly never experienced before. "Do you know who I am?" the young man demanded, trying to salvage some shred of dignity. "My father is Alpha Valdric of the Silver Fang. He will not let this insult stand." Kaelin smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "Tell your father that Kaelin Blackwood sends his regards. Tell him that the woman carries my protection, and anyone who threatens her threatens me. Tell him," he paused, letting the words sink in, "that the Northern King is not as dead as he has been led to believe." The color drained from the young hunter's face. He recognized the name. Everyone in the wolf territories knew the name of the king who had vanished after the massacre, the king whose kingdom had splintered into a dozen warring factions, the king who was spoken of in whispers as either a monster or a ghost. The leader swallowed hard. "I will deliver your message." "Good. Now take your pack and leave. If I see any of you again, I will be less merciful." They fled. Dragging their wounded comrades, they disappeared into the winter forest with considerably less arrogance than they had arrived with. Kaelin stood in the clearing for a long moment, letting the adrenaline fade, feeling the familiar ache of muscles used for violence after too long a rest. Then he turned and walked back to the cave. Alara was standing just inside the entrance, her dark eyes wide with something that might have been fear or might have been awe. "You are not as weak as you pretend to be." Her voice was soft. "I never pretended to be weak. I only said I was not fit for power. There is a difference. And yet you just demonstrated exactly the kind of power that could protect people. That could make a difference." He walked past her into the warmth of the cave. "I demonstrated the kind of power that kills innocence when wielded by arrogant fools. Those young men were lucky I have learned restraint." She followed him. "That is exactly my point. You have learned. You are not the same man who ordered that attack 3 years ago." Kaelin turned to face her. "And how would you know? You have known me for 6 days. Because in 6 days, you have done nothing but care for me. A stranger, someone who has no claim on you whatsoever. You have fed me, sheltered me, protected me, and just now, when you could have killed all 6 of those hunters, you chose not to. They were boys planning at being warriors. Killing them would have proved nothing. That is not why you spared them, and you know it." He had no answer to that. The silence stretched between them. Outside, the wind continued its endless howl. Inside, the fire crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. "We have to leave," Kaelin said finally. "They will return with more men. Alpha Valdric will not accept this challenge to his authority." "Where will we go?" "North. To the one place I know we will be safe. A place where even the most powerful packs fear to tread." "And what place is that?" "The Temple of First Wolves, where the goddess first blessed our kind. Where kings used to seek guidance before making the decisions that would shape generations. You have been there before. Once, a lifetime ago. I went to ask for strength. She gave me a warning instead." He looked into the fire. I did not listen. "What warning?" "That power without mercy destroys everything it touches." Alara moved closer to him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her body. "And now? Now I am going to take you somewhere safe. Then I am going to figure out who fed me that false intelligence 3 years ago. Then I'm going to make certain they never have the opportunity to harm anyone else." She studied his face for a long moment. "That sounds like a man with a purpose." "I have not had a purpose in 3 years." He met her eyes. "Perhaps it is time I found one again." The journey took 3 days. They traveled at night, when Kaelin's wolf senses gave them the greatest advantage, and sheltered during the day in caves and hollows he had discovered during his years of isolation. He carried her when the terrain grew too rough for her pregnant body to navigate. He fed her from his dwindling supplies and hunted when those ran out. On the morning of the 3rd day, they emerged from a narrow mountain pass and saw the valley spread before them. It was beautiful, a hidden sanctuary carved between 2 peaks, protected from the harshest weather by some quirk of geography, or perhaps by divine intervention. Snow covered the ground, but it was thinner here. Green showed through in patches. A stream ran through the center, somehow unfrozen despite the winter cold. And at the heart of the valley stood the temple, ancient, crumbling in places, but still magnificent. White stone columns rose toward the sky, carved with wolves and moons and symbols from a language that had been dead for 1,000 years. The architecture spoke of a time when wolfkind had been united, when they had built monuments to their goddess rather than fighting each other over territory and power. "It is beautiful." Alara's voice was hushed. "It is sacred." Kaelin led her down the slope toward the temple. "This is where I left my crown. This is where I walked away from everything I was." They entered the temple through a massive doorway that had lost its doors centuries ago. Inside, the air was warmer. Moonlight filtered through gaps in the ceiling, illuminating an altar of black obsidian that dominated the central chamber. On the altar lay a silver crown. Kaelin stopped. He had not seen the crown since the day he abandoned it, had not let himself think about it. But there it was, exactly where he had left it, untouched, uncorrupted, waiting. Alara walked past him, drawn toward the altar by something he could not see. Her steps were slow, almost dreamlike. Her eyes were fixed on the crown with an intensity that seemed almost supernatural. "Alara," his voice was sharp, "do not touch it." But she either could not hear him or could not stop herself. Her hand reached out, fingers extended, moving toward the silver metal as if guided by an invisible force. Contact. The world exploded into light. Kaelin threw his arm up to shield his eyes, but even through his sleeve he could see the brilliance that filled the temple, silver light, pure and absolute, pouring from the altar like water from a broken dam. And in that light he heard a voice, not human, not wolf, something older than both, something that resonated in the bones and the blood and the very essence of what it meant to be alive. Pathfinder. Alara was suspended in the air, lifted by the light, her body rigid and her eyes blazing silver. Healer of the Forsaken, Mother of the New Dawn. I have waited for you across 1,000 years. You will mend what has been broken. You will judge what has been corrupt. You will bring forth a generation that remembers the old ways. The light pulsed once, twice, 3 times. With each pulse, Kaelin saw images, visions, the past and the future tangled together in a tapestry of possibility and fate. He saw Alara as she was now, pregnant and afraid. He saw her as she would be, crowned and glorious, standing before an army of wolves who looked to her with devotion. He saw a child with silver eyes, leading a generation into a new age. He saw himself kneeling before her, pledging something he could not quite understand. And he saw his grandmother, Lady Moira, standing in this very temple, her eyes glowing with the same silver light that now consumed Alara. "You have a destiny, Kaelin." The memory of her voice merged with the goddess's power. "One day you will meet someone who carries a gift too precious for this world." His grandmother had known, had always known. She had been a pathfinder herself, hiding her gift from a world that would have feared or exploited it. And she had seen this moment coming, decades before it arrived. Then the light faded, and Alara collapsed. Kaelin caught her before she hit the ground. He held her against his chest, feeling her heart race, watching her eyes flutter as she struggled to return to consciousness. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, older somehow, weighted with something that had not been there before. "I saw everything." She looked up at him, and her dark eyes now held flecks of silver that had not been there before. "Your past, your pain, your future. What did you see?" She reached up and touched his face. The touch was gentle, almost reverent. "Your redemption, Kaelin Blackwood, and my purpose." He stared at her. The woman he had found dying in the snow, the exile he had saved on a whim. She was something more now, something ancient and powerful and absolutely central to the fate of their entire species. "What are you?" he whispered. She smiled, and in that smile he saw echoes of the goddess whose voice still rang in his ears. "I am a pathfinder, born once in 1,000 years. And you," she touched the scar on his chest through his furs, "the mark of the royal line, are the one chosen to protect me." Kaelin Blackwood, the fallen king, the self-exiled murderer, the man who had spent 3 years believing he was unworthy of any purpose, knelt before her. Not in submission, in recognition. His grandmother had prepared him for this moment. The goddess had orchestrated it across decades, and now, finally, he understood. Whatever came next, he understood one thing with absolute certainty. His exile was over. His redemption had begun. 7 days passed in the Temple of First Wolves. 7 days of discovery. 7 days of transformation. 7 days during which Kaelin Blackwood began to understand that redemption was not a destination, but a journey, and that the goddess had placed him on this path for reasons he was only beginning to comprehend. Alara's awakening as a pathfinder had changed everything. The power that now lived within her was unlike anything Kaelin had witnessed in his 43 years. It was not the brute strength of an alpha or the healing touch of an omega. It was something far more fundamental. She could see the threads of fate that connected all living things, silver strands that shimmered in the air around every wolf, every human, every creature that drew breath. These threads told stories. They revealed truths. They exposed lies that had been buried for decades. And she could manipulate them, not easily, not without cost, but with practice and concentration. Alara could pull at those threads, reading the past and glimpsing possible futures. She could sense emotions, intentions, the deep buried secrets that people hid even from themselves. It was, Kaelin realized, the most dangerous power imaginable. In the wrong hands, it could be used to control, to blackmail, to destroy. In the right hands, it could bring justice to a world that had forgotten what the word meant. He was determined to ensure it remained in the right hands. Teaching her to control the gift became his purpose. Each morning, they would sit together in the central chamber of the temple, the obsidian altar between them, and he would guide her through exercises designed to sharpen her focus and strengthen her will. "Close your eyes." His voice was calm, patient, stripped of the harshness that had characterized his speech during his years of isolation. "Breathe slowly. Feel the threads around you without trying to grasp them. Let them come to you. There are so many." Her voice carried wonder and fear in equal measure. "I can feel the deer in the forest, the birds in the sky, even the fish in the stream. They all have threads. Everything that lives is connected. That is the first truth the goddess teaches us. We are not separate beings fighting for survival. We are part of a single tapestry, and every action we take affects the whole." "How do you know this? You are not a pathfinder." "No, but I was trained by one." Kaelin opened his eyes and watched her face as she concentrated. "My grandmother. She was the last pathfinder before you. She died when I was 12, but she taught me enough to understand what you are experiencing." Alara's eyes flew open. Your grandmother was a pathfinder? She never revealed it publicly. The gift is too dangerous for that. Too many would seek to use it for their own purposes. But she trained me in secret, preparing me for—" He paused, the realization hitting him with unexpected force. "For this. For you. The goddess planned this. It seems so." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered valley. "My grandmother told me that one day I would meet a pathfinder who needed my protection. She said that my role would be to shield her from those who would corrupt her gift and to help her use it for the betterment of our kind. I thought she was speaking metaphorically. I thought she meant I should be a just ruler, protecting my people from corruption. I never imagined she meant it literally. But then the massacre happened." Alara's voice was soft. "And you exiled yourself. And I nearly failed my purpose before it even began. If you had died in that snow, if I had walked away as I was tempted to do—" "But you did not walk away." "No." He turned to face her. Perhaps that was her final gift to me, the knowledge that some responsibilities cannot be abandoned, no matter how much we might wish to escape them. The training continued, day after day, hour after hour. Kaylin pushed her to extend her range, to distinguish between different types of threads, to read the subtle variations in color and texture that conveyed meaning. The silver threads indicated hope and potential. Black threads spoke of pain and trauma. Red threads burned with rage or passion. Gold threads shimmered with love and devotion. And some threads, the rarest ones, pulsed with colors that had no names, indicating fates that defied simple categorization. "What do my threads look like?" Kaylin asked one evening, as they sat by the fire in the chamber he had claimed as his sleeping quarters. Alara studied him for a long moment. "Complex. Silver and black intertwined so tightly I cannot tell where one ends and the other begins. But there is gold there, too, growing stronger every day. Gold means love." Yes, the word hung between them, laden with implications neither was quite ready to address. They had grown close over these 7 days, closer than Kaylin had allowed himself to become with anyone in years. She understood his guilt without dismissing it. She saw his flaws without condemning him for them. And she needed him, genuinely needed him, in a way that stirred something he had thought permanently dead. But she was also pregnant with another man's child, a child conceived in violence, and he was a broken king with blood on his hands and ghosts in his memory. Whatever was growing between them was complicated by factors that could not be ignored. The baby kicked against his hand when he helped her rise one morning, and both of them froze at the contact. "She is strong." Alara's voice was barely above a whisper. "Stronger every day." "She?" "I can feel her threads. She is a girl, and she will be—" Alara paused, her expression shifting to something between wonder and concern. "She will be powerful, more powerful than I am." "How is that possible? You are a pathfinder." "I do not know, but I can see it in her fate. She will change everything." Kaylin placed his hand more firmly on her belly, feeling the life moving beneath the skin. "Then we will make certain she has the chance to do so, whatever it takes." Alara met his eyes and something passed between them, an understanding, a commitment, not spoken aloud but real nonetheless. On the 8th day, they were no longer alone. Kaylin sensed them approaching from miles away. 2 wolves, moving with the careful determination of those who had been searching for a long time. Not enemies. The rhythm of their movement was wrong for hunters, too steady, too confident. These were wolves who expected to be welcomed, not wolves preparing for battle. He stepped outside the temple as they emerged from the tree line at the edge of the valley. The first was an old man, 70 years at least, with white hair that fell to his shoulders and a face carved by decades of experience into something that resembled ancient stone. He walked with a slight limp, a souvenir of some long-ago battle, but his eyes were clear and sharp. He wore the robes of a scholar, gray and plain, but the sword at his hip was no scholar's weapon. "Brennan." Kaylin's voice cracked on the name. After 3 years, he had not expected to ever see his old mentor again. The second figure was larger, a massive wolf of a man with shoulders broad enough to carry mountains and hands that could crush stone. His hair was still dark, though gray was beginning to show at the temples, and his face bore scars that told stories of countless battles. He wore armor, not ceremonial armor, but the scarred and dented plate of a warrior who had seen real combat. "Aldrich," Kalen's childhood friend, his shield brother, the man who had stood beside him through every campaign, every victory, every defeat, until the massacre, until Kalen had walked away from everything, including the people who would have followed him into hell itself. The two men stopped 10 paces from the temple entrance. For a long moment no one spoke. The wind whispered through the valley. Snow drifted lazily from the sky. Then Aldrich broke the silence in the manner that was uniquely his. 3 years. His voice was rough with emotion. 3 years I have searched every frozen mountain and forgotten valley in the north. And I find you here, in the one place you told me never to look for you. I told you not to look at all. Since when have I ever listened to your orders? The words could have been angry. They could have been accusatory. Instead, they carried a weight of love and frustration that only old friends could understand. Kalen felt something give way in his chest. A wall he had built brick by brick over 3 years of solitude. He had told himself he did not deserve friendship, did not deserve loyalty, did not deserve to be found by people who cared about him. But here they were, despite everything, despite his commands, despite the shame and the guilt and the 1,000 reasons he had given them to abandon him. How did you find me? It was Brennan who answered. We did not find you. We followed the signs. When the hunters returned to Silver Fang territory with tales of a scarred warrior who claimed to be the Northern King, we knew. And when we felt the pulse of divine power from this valley 3 days ago, we knew exactly where you had gone. You felt the pulse? Every wolf with any sensitivity felt it. Brennan's ancient eyes were fixed on the temple behind Kalen. A pathfinder has awakened. The first in 1,000 years. The goddess herself announced it to the world. Then others will come. Yes, which is why we are here. The old scholar stepped forward. To serve, if you will have us. To protect, if you will allow it. To stand beside our king, whatever form that kingship takes. Kalen wanted to refuse. The impulse rose automatically, the product of 3 years of training himself to reject connection. But as he looked at these two men who had spent years searching for him, who had given up their own lives to track down a friend who had told them to forget him, he found that the words would not come. Instead, he stepped aside and gestured toward the temple. There is someone you should meet. Alara was standing in the central chamber when they entered, silhouetted against the light that streamed through the gaps in the ancient ceiling. She had changed in the 8 days since her awakening. There was a steadiness to her now, a presence that had not been there before. She carried her pregnant belly with a dignity that seemed almost regal. Brennan stopped dead when he saw her. His ancient eyes widened, and Kalen watched as the scholar fell to his knees, something he had not done even for kings. The Pathfinder. Brennan's voice trembled. After all these centuries, after all the waiting and the hoping. Rise! Alara's voice carried an authority that surprised even Kalen. I am not a goddess to be worshipped. I am a woman with a gift I barely understand. You are far more than that. Brennan stood slowly. You are the hope of our entire species, the one who will heal the wounds that have divided wolfkind for generations. That seems like a great deal of weight to place on someone you have just met. I have waited my entire life to meet you. The old scholar's eyes glistened. My grandmother served the last Pathfinder. She told me stories of what our kind could be if we had the wisdom to follow the goddess's chosen. I never thought I would live to see another. Aldrich, who had remained silent, stepped forward. He studied Alara with the practical assessment of a warrior evaluating an asset. Then his eyes moved to her belly, and his expression softened. The child. He looked at Kalen. Is it yours? No. Kalen's voice was flat. She was attacked. Before I found her, the pack that cast her out blamed her for her own violation. Something dark passed through Aldrich's eyes, the expression of a man who had strong opinions about those who harmed women and children. His hands clenched into fists. Names, give me names. That is not for you to decide. Alara spoke before Kalen could respond. I will deal with my former pack in my own time, in my own way, when I am ready, when I am... Aldrich looked at her, really looked at her, seeing past the pregnant belly and the young face to the steel beneath. Then he nodded slowly. I can see why he protects you. You do not need much protecting. Everyone needs protecting sometimes. Alara glanced at Kalen. Even fallen kings who believe they deserve nothing but punishment. The addition of Brennan and Aldrich to their small group changed the dynamic of the temple. The ancient structure, which had seemed abandoned and lonely, now hummed with purpose. Brennan established himself in the library wing, sorting through texts that had not been read in centuries, searching for information about Pathfinders and their role in Wolf Society. Aldrich took charge of security, mapping the valley, establishing watch points, preparing for the inevitable moment when less friendly visitors would arrive. And in the evenings they gathered around the fire and talked. Kaelin learned what had happened to his kingdom in the 3 years since his departure. The news was grim. Without a clear successor, the northern territories had fragmented. Regional lords had declared independence. Border disputes had escalated into open warfare. The unity he had spent his reign building had crumbled in his absence. I could have stopped it. His voice was heavy with regret. If I had stayed, if I had faced judgment instead of running. If you had stayed, Brennan interrupted gently, you would have destroyed yourself. I watched you that night, Kaelin. You were not capable of leading anyone. The guilt would have consumed you, and your enemies would have exploited your weakness. Leaving was the right choice. 200 people died because of my orders. Yes, and that weight will never leave you. But you have carried it for 3 years now. You have let it shape you without destroying you. You have found a new purpose. Brennan's ancient eyes held wisdom accumulated over 7 decades. That is what redemption looks like. Not the erasure of sin, but the transformation of the sinner. The old scholar's words lingered in Kaelin's mind as the days passed. His relationship with Alara continued to deepen. There was an ease between them now, a comfort that came from shared purpose and mutual respect. He found himself looking forward to their morning training sessions. He found himself lingering after dinner, talking about things that had nothing to do with politics or prophecy. He found himself, for the first time in years, thinking about a future that contained something other than guilt and isolation. She caught him staring at her one evening, his expression unguarded. "What are you thinking about?" Kaelin considered lying. The instinct was automatic after so many years of keeping his thoughts to himself. But something stopped him. The golden thread she had mentioned, perhaps. The one that was growing stronger every day. "I am thinking that I do not deserve you." He spoke slowly, choosing each word with care. "I am thinking that you came into my life at the exact moment I had given up on ever feeling anything again. I am thinking that the goddess has a sense of humor, pairing a broken king with a woman who can see every flaw and scar on his soul. I do see them." Alara moved closer to him. "I see every thread of pain you carry, every moment of guilt, every face of the dead that haunts your dreams, and yet you stay. And yet I stay." She reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "Because I also see the threads you cannot see yourself. The mercy you showed those young hunters when you could have killed them, the patience you have shown in training me, the kindness you have given to a pregnant stranger who had no claim on your help. That does not erase what I have done. No, but it shows what you are becoming. And that man," Ilara's dark eyes held his silver ones, "that man is someone I could love." The word hung in the air between them. Love. Such a small word for such a vast concept. Kaelin had loved before, his kingdom, his people, his duty. But this was different. This was personal in a way that frightened him. "The child." His voice was rough. "It is not mine. Do you care?" The question should have been complicated. It should have required thought, consideration, weighing of factors. Instead, the answer came immediately, rising from somewhere deep in his chest. "No, I do not care. If you will have me, I will love that child as my own. I will protect her, teach her, give her everything I should have given to my people before I failed them." Alara's eyes filled with tears. "Then why do you hold back?" "Because I do not deserve happiness. Not after what I have done. Not while the families of the dead still grieve." She took his hands in hers. "Kaelin, listen to me. The dead do not want you to suffer forever. The goddess does not demand endless penance. The only one who cannot forgive you is yourself." He wanted to argue, wanted to list the reasons why she was wrong, but the words would not come, because somewhere in the depths of his soul he knew she was right. The kiss, when it came, was gentle, almost tentative. Two broken people reaching for each other across the gap of their respective wounds. It was not passionate in the way of young lovers. It was something deeper, the recognition of kindred spirits, the promise of partnership. When they finally pulled apart, Kaelin found that the ice around his heart had cracked a little further. The army arrived on the 15th day. Kaelin sensed them long before they appeared. 200 wolves, moving in tight formation, their purpose unmistakable. This was not a search party. This was an invasion force. At their head rode a young man Kaelin recognized from Alara's descriptions. Dark hair, proud bearing, the silver armband of the Alpha's son, Darius. "They come for me." Alara's voice was calm as she stood beside him at the temple entrance. "I felt their threads yesterday. They have been tracking us since the hunters reported back. How do you want to handle this?" She looked at him, and he saw something new in her eyes: confidence, purpose, the bearing of a queen rather than an exile. Together, they walked out to meet the army. The wolves had formed a semicircle around the temple entrance, blocking any escape. 200 warriors in human and wolf form, armed with silver and steel. At their center, Darius sat astride a massive black horse, his expression a mask of cold authority. But Kaelin saw what Alara must be seeing with her gift: the tremor in the young man's hands, the uncertainty behind his eyes, the threads of guilt and regret that wrapped around him like chains. This was not a man who believed in his mission. This was a man executing orders he did not fully support. "Alara," Darius's voice carried across the snowy field. "You will return with us to face judgment for your crimes against the pack." "What crimes?" Alara's voice was steady. "The crime of being attacked? The crime of telling the truth? The crime of surviving despite your attempts to destroy me? You brought shame upon our pack. You were unfaithful to your promised mate. I was violated." She stepped forward, and Kaelin saw the threads around her begin to shimmer with silver light. "You know this, Darius. You have always known. I see it in your threads. The guilt you carry, the doubt that has eaten at you for 6 months." Darius's expression flickered. "Threads? What are you talking about?" "I am a pathfinder." The words sent a visible ripple through the assembled army, awakened by the goddess herself. "I see the truth of every soul, and yours is screaming with secrets. You are lying, trying to save yourself with fairy tales." "Am I?" Alara raised her hand, and the air around her began to glow. "Then let me show everyone what I see." The power that erupted from her was unlike anything Kaelin had witnessed. Silver light poured from her outstretched hand, forming threads visible to every wolf present. The threads wrapped around Darius, pulling from him images and emotions that materialized in the air for all to see. The army watched in horror and fascination as Darius's truth was revealed. They saw him learning of Alara's assault, saw his initial rage, his desire for justice, saw his father, Alpha Valdric, counseling caution, saw Valdric suggesting that perhaps Alara had invited the attack. Perhaps she had been unfaithful and was using the assault as an excuse. They saw Darius's doubt taking root, saw him choosing to believe his father over the woman he claimed to love, saw him standing silent as Alara was condemned, saw him looking away as she was dragged to the gates and thrown into the snow. And they saw the aftermath, the sleepless nights, the bottles of wine consumed alone, the prayers whispered to a goddess he was no longer sure he believed in, the crushing weight of suspicion that he had destroyed an innocent woman to protect his own pride. "Stop!" Darius's voice was a broken thing. "Please stop." The light faded. Alara lowered her hand. She was trembling with the effort the display had cost her, but her voice remained strong. "This is the truth you were too afraid to face. The truth your father buried because admitting it would mean admitting he failed to protect a member of his pack. The truth you have been running from for 6 months." Darius slid from his horse. His legs would not hold him, and he collapsed to his knees in the snow. Around him, his army shifted uneasily. Some looked at their commander with pity, others with contempt, a few with a dawning horror that suggested they had suspected the truth all along. "I loved you." Darius's voice was barely audible. "I loved you, and I was too weak to protect you." "Love is not weakness." Alara's voice softened despite everything. "Weakness is choosing comfort over truth. Weakness is letting others convince you to abandon what you know is right." "What do I do?" He looked up at her, and Kaelin saw a boy beneath the proud facade. A boy who had been taught that strength meant never showing doubt, never admitting error. "What can I possibly do to make this right?" Alara was silent for a long moment. The army waited. Kaelin waited. The wind held its breath. "You can start by telling the truth." Her words fell like stones into still water. "Go back to your pack and tell them what really happened, not because I demand it, but because you know it is right. And then you can spend the rest of your life learning that true strength comes from having the courage to face your failures, not from pretending they do not exist." My father will never allow it. Your father is not the subject of this judgment. You are. She stepped closer to him, close enough to touch. I am offering you a choice, Darius, the same choice I was denied. You can continue down the path you are on, obeying orders you know are wrong, burying truths you know are real. Or you can become the man I once believed you were capable of being. Darius stared at her. The moment stretched. Kalen watched, his hand on his blade, ready to act if the young man chose violence. But violence did not come. Instead, Darius bowed his head. I choose truth. His voice cracked. I choose to be better. A murmur ran through the army. Soldiers exchanged glances, uncertain how to respond to their commander's surrender. Kalen stepped forward. Those of you who wish to leave may do so freely. Tell your Alpha that the Pathfinder is under my protection. Tell him that the Northern King lives and that justice is coming for those who have forgotten its meaning. Some of the soldiers turned to go, but not all, not even most. To Kalen's surprise, nearly half the army remained standing, their eyes fixed on Alara with something that looked very much like hope. We wish to stay. One of them stepped forward, an older warrior with gray in his beard. We have heard the rumors of the Pathfinder. We have felt the goddess's power for ourselves. If you will have us, we would serve. Alara looked at Kalen. He saw the question in her eyes and understood its weight. This was the moment when their small refuge became something else, something larger, something that could change the balance of power across all the wolf territories. He nodded. Those who wish to stay are welcome. Alara's voice carried across the field. But understand what you are choosing. We do not rule through fear or force. We build through mercy and truth. If you cannot accept that, leave now. No one left, and so the army stayed. The temple, which had housed only 4 people that morning, now sheltered over 100. Kalen found himself doing something he had not done in 3 years. He was organizing, delegating, leading. But it was different this time. He consulted with Alara on every decision. He sought Brennan's counsel. He listened to Aldrich's tactical assessments. And he paid attention to Darius, who had thrown himself into service with the desperate energy of a man seeking redemption. The young Alpha's son became a student of sorts. He watched how Kalen led. He listened when the older man spoke of the mistakes that had brought him low. He asked questions that revealed a mind capable of growth, if properly guided. You chose mercy, Darius said one evening as they walked the perimeter of the valley together. When you could have had me killed. When you could have taken revenge for what I did to Alara. Why? Because mercy is harder than revenge. Kalen's silver eyes reflected the moonlight. Revenge ends a story. Mercy opens the possibility of a different one. I do not know if I could have done the same. That is honest. And honesty is the first step. Kalen stopped and faced him. I was like you once, certain of my own righteousness, convinced that strength meant crushing opposition. It took the deaths of 200 innocent people to teach me otherwise. I am offering you the chance to learn the lesson without paying such a terrible price. Darius was quiet for a long moment. Then, haltingly, he told Kalen about his father, about Valdrick's iron rule, about the fear that permeated the Silver Fang Pack, about the young wolves who disappeared when they questioned the Alpha's decisions, about the growing alliance with dark practitioners that Valdrick believed would make them invincible. Kalen listened, and with each revelation, pieces of a larger puzzle began to fall into place. The false intelligence that had led to the massacre, the timing of Alara's exile, the relentless pursuit that had followed her across territories. These were not isolated incidents. They were moves in a game that had been playing out for years, orchestrated by someone who understood exactly how to manipulate events to their advantage. Your father. Kalen's voice was carefully controlled. He has dealings with those who practice dark magic? I believe so. Darius's face was pale. I have no proof, but there have been visitors, strange wolves who do not smell right, meetings that happen behind closed doors, and the attack on Alara, the one that resulted in her pregnancy. Darius hesitated. I always wondered. The timing was too perfect, and the attacker was never found, despite our best trackers. It was as if he had never existed, or as if someone made certain he would never be found. The implications hung between them. Kalen did not voice the suspicion that was forming in his mind. Not yet. Not until he had more information. But the shape of a conspiracy was becoming visible, and at its center stood Alpha Valdrick. The wedding took place 1 month after the army's arrival. It was not the grand ceremony that tradition demanded for a royal marriage. There was no procession of noble houses, no weeks of feasting and celebration, no diplomatic negotiations over territory and alliances. Instead, there was a simple gathering in the temple's central chamber, Brennan presiding as officiant, Aldrich and Darius standing as witnesses, 100 wolves watching as two broken people chose to build something new together. Kaelin spoke his vows with a voice that trembled despite his best efforts. "I do not promise to be perfect. I have proven that I am capable of terrible failures, but I promise to be present, to stand beside you in every challenge, to protect you and our daughter with everything I have, to learn from my mistakes instead of repeating them, and to spend whatever time the goddess grants me trying to become worthy of the trust you have placed in me." Alara's response was equally simple. "I do not need you to be perfect. I need you to be real. I need you to share your burdens instead of carrying them alone. I need you to let me see your scars without shame as I show you mine. And I need you to believe, truly believe, that redemption is not just possible, but already underway." They exchanged tokens, not rings, which were a human tradition, but small carved wolves that Aldrich had crafted during the weeks of preparation. The figures were simple but beautiful, each one designed to fit with the other, incomplete alone but whole together. The kiss that sealed their union drew cheers from the assembled wolves. Kaelin felt the last remnants of his isolation crumble. He was part of something now, something larger than himself, something that demanded his best and forgave his worst. He was no longer a fallen king wandering alone in the mountains. He was a husband, a leader, and in a few short weeks he would be a father. Seraphina came into the world on a night when the moon hung full and silver above the valley. The labor was difficult. Alara was strong, but the birth seemed determined to test every ounce of that strength. Kaelin stayed with her through every moment, holding her hand, whispering encouragement, feeling utterly helpless in the face of a struggle he could not fight for her. Brennan served as midwife, his scholar's knowledge extending to the practical arts of bringing new life into the world. Aldrich paced outside the door, his warrior's stoicism cracking under the weight of waiting. And when the baby's cry finally echoed through the temple, Kaelin wept. She was perfect, tiny and wrinkled and absolutely perfect. Her eyes, when they opened, were silver, not the dark of her mother or the unknown shade of her biological father. Silver, like Kaelin's own. Silver, like moonlight. Silver, like the goddess's blessing made manifest. "She chose you." Alara's voice was exhausted but radiant. "The goddess marked her as yours before she ever drew breath." Kaelin held his daughter for the first time. She weighed almost nothing in his arms, so small, so fragile, so utterly dependent on him for protection. Seraphina. He whispered the name they had chosen together, for the goddess, for hope, for all the children I could not save. The baby's hand wrapped around his finger, and Kaelin felt something shift in the universe. A new thread had been added to the tapestry of fate, a bright thread, a thread that would grow and strengthen and eventually help reweave the entire pattern. 2 years passed. 2 years of growth and change and the slow building of something remarkable. The valley had transformed from a hidden sanctuary into a thriving community. Wolves came from across the territories, drawn by rumors of the Pathfinder and the redeemed king. They came seeking refuge. They came seeking purpose. They came seeking the hope that had become so rare in a world dominated by fear and power. Kaelin trained them. Brennan educated them. Alara judged them, using her gift to separate those who came with pure intentions from those who sought to exploit or betray. And Seraphina grew, a child of impossible gifts who had spoken her first word at 6 months and shifted into wolf form at 1 year. She was extraordinary. Everyone who saw her knew it. The silver eyes that saw more than any child should, the gravity that settled over her features when she concentrated, the moments when she would stare at nothing, her gaze fixed on threads invisible to everyone except her mother. "She will surpass me," Alara said one evening, watching their daughter play with the other children of the valley. "Whatever I am, she will be more." "Are you frightened?" "Sometimes." Alara's hand found his. "But then I remember that she will have you to guide her, and I remember that fear is just love wearing a different mask." They had built something beautiful in these 2 years, a kingdom of exiles, a refuge for the broken, a place where mercy was not weakness but strength, where judgment came with the opportunity for redemption, where wolves learned that there were other ways to live than the endless struggle for dominance. But beauty attracts attention, and not all attention is benevolent. The night everything changed began like any other. Seraphina had been put to bed, her silver eyes drooping with sleep after a day of exploration and discovery. Kaelin had kissed her forehead and whispered the words he told her every night. "You are loved, you are protected, and whatever tomorrow brings, we will face it together." She had smiled her small smile and drifted into dreams. 4 hours later, her scream tore through the night. Kaelin was out of bed and running before he was fully awake. He burst into Seraphina's room to find her sitting upright, her eyes blazing with silver light so intense it hurt to look at them. But it was her voice that stopped him cold. It was not the voice of a 2-year-old child. It was something ancient, something vast, something that resonated with power that made his bones tremble. Kaelin Blackwood. The words came from his daughter's mouth, but belonged to someone else entirely. "You have proven yourself in my eyes. You have built what I hoped you would build. But the final test approaches." "Goddess!" Kaelin fell to his knees. "What would you have of me?" "The shadow comes." The voice continued, relentless. "His name is Fenris, and he brings 50 wolves twisted by dark magic. He believes the child is his blood. He believes she belongs to him. The attacker." Kaelin's blood ran cold. "The one who violated Alara. He is a tool, a weapon aimed at your heart. The true enemy stands in shadow, pulling strings you have not yet seen." "Who? Tell me who." "The one who betrayed you 3 years ago. The one who fed you lies and watched you destroy innocence. The one who has been playing this game since before you were born. Valdric." The name surfaced from the depths of suspicion where Kaelin had buried it. It has always been Valdric. The Alpha of Silver Fang sees further than most. He recognized your strength and knew he could not defeat you directly, so he chose to destroy you from within. The massacre, the exile of the Pathfinder, the creature he created to hunt her, all pieces of a single design. Why? Because he fears what you and your queen represent. Mercy, truth, a different way of being. He has built his power on fear and cruelty, and your existence threatens everything he has created. The light in Seraphina's eyes began to fade. Her small body trembled as the goddess's presence withdrew. "You have 3 days." The voice was fainter now, distant. "Fenris comes with fire and madness. Stop him, and you will face the true enemy. Fail, and everything you have built will burn." Then Seraphina collapsed, and she was just a child again. A frightened child who had just been used as a conduit for divine communication. Kaelin gathered her into his arms. He held her as she sobbed, murmuring comfort he did not entirely feel. Alara appeared in his doorway, her face pale with terror. "I heard." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I heard everything." "Then you know what comes." "Yes." Their eyes met across the room. 2 years of peace, 2 years of healing, 2 years of believing that perhaps, finally, they had outrun the shadows of their past. And now the shadows were coming home. Kaelin stood, still holding his daughter. "Summon Brennan and Aldrich. Call Darius and the War Council. We have 3 days to prepare." "And then?" "And then we end this." He looked down at Seraphina, at the child who carried so much hope on her small shoulders, at the daughter he had sworn to protect, whatever it takes. The War Council gathered before dawn. They met in the great hall of the temple, a space that had once hosted the prayers of ancient wolves and now served as the nerve center of a growing kingdom. Maps covered the central table. Torches cast flickering light across faces drawn with concern and determination. Kaelin stood at the head of the table, his silver eyes moving from face to face as he took stock of those who would stand beside him in the coming battle. Brennan, ancient and wise, his mind already working through strategies and contingencies. Aldrich, solid as stone, his scarred hands resting on the hilt of his blade. Darius, young but tempered by 2 years of learning what true leadership meant. And a dozen other commanders, wolves who had come to the valley seeking refuge and found purpose instead. Alara sat apart from the main group, her eyes unfocused as she read the threads that surrounded each person in the room. She had not slept since Seraphina's possession. None of them had. "The goddess spoke true." Brennan's voice broke the heavy silence. "Fenris approaches from the eastern passes. 50 wolves, perhaps more. They move with unnatural coordination, the mark of dark magic binding them together. I have studied the reports from our scouts. Aldrich stepped forward, pointing to locations on the map. They are not trying to hide their approach. They want us to know they are coming. This is not an invasion. It is a statement. A challenge. Kalen's voice was flat. Fenris wants to face me directly. He believes Seraphina is his daughter, stolen from him. He wants to reclaim what he thinks is his. He is wrong. Alara spoke for the first time. I have seen his threads. They are twisted beyond recognition, corrupted by the dark magic that was forced into him. But beneath the corruption, there is a truth he does not know. What truth? Seraphina is not his child. Alara's dark eyes met Kalen's silver ones. The timing never made sense. I was attacked 3 months before I realized I was pregnant, but the healers confirmed that conception occurred weeks after the assault. Fenris violated me, but he did not father my daughter. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Then who? Darius asked the question everyone was thinking. I do not know. Alara's voice carried a weight of old pain. There was another. Someone I trusted. Someone who came to me in the aftermath, offering comfort. I was vulnerable. I was broken. And he took advantage of that brokenness. Kalen felt rage building in his chest. Not at Alara, never at Alara, but at the web of manipulation and cruelty that had surrounded her from the beginning. Does it matter? His voice cut through the murmurs that had begun around the table. Seraphina is my daughter in every way that counts. Whoever contributed to her creation is irrelevant. What matters is that Fenris believes a lie, and someone planted that lie in his corrupted mind. Valdric. Brennan spoke the name like a curse. It always comes back to Valdric. The pieces had been falling into place for months now. Every thread of investigation, every whispered rumor, every careful deduction led to the same conclusion. Alpha Valdric of the Silver Fang had been manipulating events for decades, positioning himself as the hidden power behind wolf politics while maintaining the appearance of a traditional pack leader. The false intelligence that led to the massacre had originated from sources within Valdric's network. The attack on Alara had been too convenient, too perfectly timed to destabilize the One Omega who might have posed a threat to his plans. And now Fenris, twisted into a weapon of dark magic, aimed directly at the heart of everything Kalen had built. We need to know more. Kalen turned to Darius. Your father's dealings with dark practitioners, his alliances, his plans, everything you know or suspect. Darius hesitated only a moment before nodding. He had made his choice 2 years ago, standing in the snow before this very temple. He had chosen truth over loyalty to blood. He would not waver now. For the next hour, Darius spoke. He told them of meetings held in secret chambers, of visitors who arrived at night and left before dawn, of payments made to shadowy figures in exchange for services never specified, of wolves who questioned Valdric's decisions and simply disappeared. And he told them of a name whispered in the darkest corners of the Silver Fang stronghold, the Hollow King. I never knew what it meant. Darius's voice was heavy. I thought it was just a title, an honorific among the dark practitioners. But now I wonder if it referred to something else, someone else. Someone Valdric serves. Brennan's ancient eyes were thoughtful. Or someone Valdric believes he controls. Either way, we face more than a single alpha's ambition. Kalen straightened. We face a conspiracy that has been growing for years. Fenris is just the first wave. Whatever comes after will be worse. Then we stop Fenris. Aldrich's voice was practical, grounding the discussion in immediate necessity. We stop him, and then we deal with what comes next. The plan took shape over the following hours. They could not simply wait for Fenris to arrive at the valley. The temple, for all its spiritual significance, was not designed as a fortress. A siege would favor the attackers, especially if those attackers were enhanced by dark magic. Instead, they would meet Fenris in the eastern passes. The terrain there was treacherous, full of narrow defiles and steep cliffs that would neutralize the enemy's numerical advantage. A small force of elite warriors could hold the passes indefinitely against a larger but less disciplined army. Kalen would lead the defense personally. There was no question of anything else. Fenris wanted him. Fenris would have him. But not alone. Aldrich refused to be left behind, invoking 3 decades of friendship and the sacred bond of shield brothers. Darius insisted on joining, seeing the battle as an opportunity to prove that his redemption was more than words. And Alara, despite Kalen's protests, declared that she would accompany them. My gift can turn the tide. Her voice left no room for argument. I can see the threads of the corrupted wolves. I can find weaknesses that no warrior's eye would notice. And if Fenris must die, I would have him know the truth before the end." "What truth?" "That he was used, that his suffering was manufactured for another's gain, that even his hatred is a lie." Kaelin wanted to argue. Every instinct screamed at him to keep her safe, to lock her in the deepest chamber of the temple surrounded by guards. But he had learned, over 2 years of partnership, that Alara was not a treasure to be protected. She was a force to be reckoned with. And she was right. Her gift could make the difference between victory and defeat. Very well. He took her hand in his, together. Always. They rode out at sunset, a company of 30 wolves chosen for their skill and their loyalty. Brennan remained at the temple to coordinate defenses and watch over Seraphina. The old scholar had wanted to accompany them, but age and injury made him a liability in direct combat. He accepted his role with the grace of a man who understood that some battles required wisdom rather than swords. The journey to the eastern passes took most of the night. They moved in silence, each wolf lost in private thoughts of what was to come. Kaelin rode at the front, his silver eyes scanning the darkness for threats that did not yet exist. His mind kept returning to the goddess's words, spoken through his daughter's voice. "The one who betrayed you 3 years ago, the one who fed you lies." For 3 years he had blamed himself for the massacre, had tortured himself with guilt, had exiled himself from everything he loved because he believed his own arrogance had caused the deaths of 200 innocents. And now he learned that his guilt, while not unfounded, had been weaponized against him. Valdric had not simply deceived him. Valdric had known exactly what kind of man Kaelin was, known that a king with a conscience would destroy himself more effectively than any enemy ever could. The manipulation was almost elegant in its cruelty. Kaelin had fallen precisely as Valdric had intended him to fall, had removed himself from power exactly as Valdric had hoped, had spent 3 years in self-imposed torment while Valdric consolidated control over the wolf territories. And if Alara had not stumbled into his path that winter night, if he had not found the strength to save her, the plan would have succeeded completely. The anger that burned in Kaelin's chest was unlike anything he had felt before. It was not the hot rage of youth or the cold fury of a warrior facing an enemy. It was something deeper, something that had been building for 3 years without his knowledge. He would have justice, not revenge, justice. There was a difference, and that difference mattered. They reached the eastern passes shortly before dawn. The terrain was exactly as the scouts had described. A narrow valley carved between 2 mountains, with sheer cliffs rising on either side. A single path wound through the center, wide enough for perhaps 4 wolves to walk abreast. Any force attempting to traverse the pass would be funneled into a killing ground where numbers meant nothing. Kaelin positioned his warriors along the cliff tops, hidden among the rocks and snow. Archers with silver-tipped arrows, swordsmen ready to descend on any enemy who broke through the initial defenses, and at the center of the pass, standing in plain view himself, the bait, the trap, the judgment. Fenris arrived with the rising sun. Kaelin had expected a monster. What he saw was something worse, something tragic. The wolf who led the corrupted pack was massive, easily the largest Kaelin had ever seen. Dark fur matted with old blood, eyes that burned with an unnatural red light, scars covering every visible inch of flesh. But beneath the corruption, beneath the madness, there were traces of something else. A man who had once been ordinary. An omega, perhaps, based on the bone structure. Someone who had lived a normal life before dark magic had twisted him into this abomination. Fenris stopped 50 paces from where Kaelin stood, his corrupted pack spread out behind him, 50 wolves who moved with the jerky synchronization of puppets on strings. Their eyes held the same red glow. Their mouths foamed with hunger that had nothing to do with physical need. "You have something that belongs to me." Fenris's voice was wrong, layered, as if multiple beings spoke through the same throat. "Give me the child and I will make your death quick." "The child is not yours." Kaelin's voice carried across the pass. "She never was." Lies. The red eyes blazed brighter. I remember the woman. I remember the claiming. The child is mine by right of blood." "Your memories are lies." Kaelin did not move, did not reach for his weapon. "Planted in your mind by those who seek to use you, you were violated as surely as the woman you attacked. Your will was stolen. Your purpose was corrupted. You are a weapon, Fenris, nothing more." Something flickered in those burning eyes. Doubt. Pain. The barest trace of the man who had existed before the corruption. "I am not a weapon." The voice cracked. I am a father who wants his daughter back? Yes. Then let me show you the truth. Alara stepped forward from the shadows where she had been hidden. Her hand rose, and the silver light of her gift illuminated the pass. The threads became visible to all, Fenris's threads, twisted and blackened and tangled beyond recognition, but still readable to a pathfinder's eyes. "Watch." Alara's voice was gentle despite everything. "Watch and see what was done to you." The threads pulsed, images formed in the air, visible to every wolf present. They saw Fenris as he had been. An Omega named Marcus, not the Darius of Silver Fang, but a different Marcus from a distant pack, a healer, a gentle soul, a man who had never raised his hand in violence. They saw him taken by Valdric's agents, dragged to a hidden chamber, subjected to rituals that should not exist. Dark magic poured into him like poison, his identity stripped away, his memories replaced with fabrications. They saw him released like a rabid dog, aimed at Alara with instructions burned into his corrupted mind. Attack, claim, create a child that would bind the Pathfinder to darkness. But the magic had been imperfect. The timing had been wrong. Fenris had attacked too early. The child Alara carried was not his. And when Valdric realized the failure, he had doubled down, fed Fenris more lies, more dark magic, twisted him further from any hope of redemption, made him into this creature of rage and hunger and false purpose. Fenris watched his own history with eyes that flickered between red and something darker. His massive body trembled. The corrupted wolves behind him shifted uneasily, their connection to their leader fraying as doubt crept into his fractured mind. "No." The word was a whisper. "No, that is not, I am not. You are a victim." Alara's voice carried compassion that seemed impossible given their history. "You hurt me. I will never forget that. But you were not in control. You were a weapon, aimed and fired by someone who cared nothing for your suffering or mine." "Then who?" Fenris's voice broke. "Who did this to me?" "Valdric." Kaelin spoke the name like a sentence. "Alpha of the Silver Fang, the one who pulls strings from the shadows, the one who destroyed my kingdom and would have destroyed yours if you had ever had the chance to build one." The red light in Fenris's eyes flickered violently. The corrupted wolves behind him began to whine, their connection to the dark magic destabilizing. "I can feel it." Fenris pressed his hands to his head. "The lies. They are everywhere, in my memories, in my purpose, in everything I thought I knew. You can fight it." Kaelin stepped closer, ignoring the danger. "The magic can be resisted if you choose to resist. You do not have to be what they made you." For a long moment, Fenris stood motionless. The battle between corruption and clarity played out across his features. Kaelin saw glimpses of the healer he had once been, the gentle soul who had been violated as surely as any of the victims. Then the red light surged. "No." Fenris's voice was hollow. "Broken. The damage is too deep. I can feel what I have become, what they made me. There is nothing left of who I was, only this hunger, this rage." "Then let me end it." Kaelin's hand moved to his blade. "Let me give you the peace they stole." Fenris met his eyes. For just an instant, the red faded completely, and Kaelin saw the Omega healer who had been buried beneath layers of corruption. "Thank you." The voice was different now, smaller, more human. "Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I did not choose this." "I will." The blade moved, clean, swift, merciful. Fenris fell, and with him fell the dark magic that had bound his corrupted pack. The 50 wolves collapsed as if their strings had been cut, the red light fading from their eyes, leaving only confusion and exhaustion and the slow return of stolen wills. Kaelin knelt beside the body of his fallen enemy. He closed the eyes that had finally found peace. He spoke words that wolves spoke over their honored dead, even for those who had been enemies in life. And then he rose and turned to face his warriors. "The puppet master remains." His voice carried to every ear. "Valdric sits in his stronghold, believing his schemes are secret, believing he is beyond justice. Let us show him otherwise." The march to Silver Fang territory took 4 days. Word spread ahead of them. The defeated, corrupted wolves, freed from dark magic, and offered a choice between joining the army or returning to whatever homes they could find, carried the news of Fenris's fall. Settlements that had lived in fear of Valdric's influence saw the approaching force and dared to hope. By the time they reached the borders of Silverfang territory, Kaelin's army had swelled to 300 wolves, former subjects of his own fractured kingdom who had been waiting for a sign, exiles from packs across the territories who had heard of the Pathfinder and wanted to witness history, and wolves from Silverfang itself, slipping away from Valdric's control to join the force that would bring him to judgment. Darius rode beside Kaelin as they crossed into his homeland. "I never thought I would return like this." The young man's voice was heavy. "As part of an army come to depose my own father, you could still turn back. No one would think less of you." Darius shook his head. "No. I have spent 2 years learning what leadership truly means. I have seen what mercy can build and what cruelty destroys. If I turn back now, everything I have learned becomes meaningless. Your father may die today." "I know." Darius's jaw tightened. "And if he does, it will be because of choices he made. Not because I failed to love him enough. That is a lesson you taught me. We are responsible for our own actions. Nothing more. Nothing less." They did not besiege the Silverfang stronghold. Instead, Kaelin sent messengers ahead with a simple demand. All alphas from all territories were summoned to a council of judgment, not requested, summoned, with the full weight of divine authority behind the command. "The Pathfinder calls you to account," the messengers declared. "Answer or face the goddess's wrath." They came, some out of curiosity, some out of fear, some because they had waited years for someone to finally challenge Valdric's hidden power. Within 3 days, representatives from every major pack had gathered in the great hall of the Silverfang stronghold. Valdric himself sat upon his throne, surrounded by guards, his expression a mask of confident disdain. He was an old wolf, 60 years at least, with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen centuries of political maneuvering. He showed no fear as Kaelin and Alara entered the hall. "I see the exiled king has finally found the courage to emerge from his mountains." Valdric's voice dripped with contempt. "And he brings his pregnant witch to threaten us with parlor tricks." "I bring my queen." Kaelin's voice was ice. "The Pathfinder chosen by the goddess herself. And I bring the truth you have spent decades burying." "Truth?" Valdric laughed. "What truth could you possibly possess? You are a murderer, Blackwood, a butcher who slaughtered 200 innocents and fled rather than face justice. Whatever claims you make are the desperate lies of a broken man." The assembled alphas murmured. Many had heard only Valdric's version of events, the version that painted Kaelin as a mad king who had lost control, not a victim of careful manipulation. Alara stepped forward. "You speak of truth, Alpha Valdric." Her voice carried to every corner of the hall. "Then let us see truth. Let us see the threads that bind your soul. Let us see what secrets you have hidden from the world and from yourself. You have no authority here, girl. I have the authority the goddess grants." Alara raised her hand. "And you, Valdric, are about to learn what it means to face real judgment." The silver light exploded from her palm. For Fenris, she had shown selected memories, careful revelations designed to break through corruption without overwhelming a fragile mind. For Valdric, she held nothing back. The threads that surrounded the Alpha of Silverfang were visible to everyone in the hall. Black and twisted and tangled into knots that spoke of decades of manipulation and cruelty. But the threads did not simply show his sins. They showed his reasons, his justifications, the elaborate architecture of self-deception that allowed a monster to believe he was a hero. They saw his wife, a woman he had claimed to love, a woman who had discovered his dealings with dark practitioners and threatened to expose him. They saw him hesitate, consider, and then they saw him step back and allow her to die at the hands of rogues he had hired, telling himself afterward that it was necessary, that she had betrayed him, that her death was her own fault. They saw the massacre, not from Kaelin's perspective, but from Valdric's. They saw him receiving accurate intelligence about the settlement, saw him carefully altering it, saw him feeding the false information through channels he knew Kaelin trusted, saw him watching from a distance as the Northern Army descended on innocent families, saw him smiling as the killing began. They saw Alara, saw Valdric sensing something different about her, something that frightened him in ways he could not articulate, saw him arranging for her attack, using Fenris as a tool, saw his frustration when the plan failed to produce the child he had hoped for, saw him doubling down, feeding Fenris more corruption, aiming the weapon at the valley where a threat was growing that he could not allow to mature. And they saw his ultimate goal. Not simple power, not mere territory, something older and darker. An alliance with beings who had been banished from the world centuries ago. A pact that would grant Valdric immortality in exchange for the blood of a pathfinder and her child. The Hollow King was not a title Valdric served. It was a title Valdric sought to claim. The light faded. Valdric slumped on his throne, his face ashen, his hands trembling. Around him, the assembled alphas stared with expressions that ranged from horror to rage to sick understanding. Lies. Valdric's voice was a whisper. Tricks of a witch trying to— It is truth. Brennan's voice cut through the hall. The old scholar had arrived during the revelation, carried on a litter because his aged body could no longer make the journey on foot. I served the last pathfinder. I know what their gift can do. It cannot lie. It cannot deceive. It can only reveal what is. You! Valdric's eyes fixed on his old colleague with hatred. You were supposed to die in the mountains. You were supposed to take the secret of the pathfinders to your grave. I was supposed to train the next one, which I did. Brennan's smile held no warmth. You failed, Valdric. Your schemes, your alliances, your dreams of immortality, all of it ends today. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Darius stepped forward. Father. His voice was steady, though tears streamed down his face. I offer you this one chance. Confess. Renounce your claims, accept judgment, and perhaps some mercy can be found. Valdric looked at his son. For a moment, something that might have been regret flickered in his eyes. Then it hardened into contempt. Mercy. He spat the word. That weakness you learned from the Broken King? That disease that has infected everything I built? No, I do not want your mercy. I do not need it. I am Valdric of Silver Fang. I have survived worse than this. He lunged from his throne, a blade appearing in his hand, aimed directly at Alara. Kalen moved. He did not think, did not calculate. 3 years of exile had not dulled his reflexes. A lifetime of training took over, and he intercepted Valdric's strike with a block that sent the older wolf staggering. The fight was brief. Valdric was skilled, but he was old and desperate and facing a warrior in his prime. Kalen disarmed him in 3 moves, swept his legs in 2 more, and pinned him to the floor with a knee on his chest and a blade at his throat. The hall held its breath. Kill him! Someone shouted. Justice for the massacre, justice for the innocent. Other voices joined. The cry became a chant. Kill him, kill him, kill him. Kalen looked down at the wolf who had destroyed his life, who had murdered 200 innocents to further his own ambitions, who had violated Alara and twisted Fenris and plotted to sacrifice a child for immortality. His hand tightened on the blade. 1 stroke. That was all it would take. 1 stroke, and the architect of all his suffering would be gone. The voices of the dead would be satisfied. Justice would be served. But as he stared into Valdric's terrified eyes, he heard another voice, quieter than the chanting, steadier. Alara. Kalen. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Mercy. He wanted to argue, wanted to explain that some crimes were beyond forgiveness, that some monsters deserved only death. But he had spent 2 years learning that mercy was not weakness, that true strength lay in choosing restraint when violence would be easier, that the measure of a leader was not how many enemies he destroyed, but how many he transformed. He released the blade. Valdric stared up at him in disbelief. You have 2 choices. Kalen's voice was flat. Death, quick and clean, which is more than you deserve. Or life. Life? Valdric laughed bitterly. You would let me live? I would let you live with the truth. Every day, you will wake knowing that everyone has seen what you truly are. Every day, you will walk among wolves who know your secrets. Every day, you will watch your son lead the pack you corrupted, building something better from the ashes of your ambition. And every day, for the rest of your miserable life, you will know that mercy defeated you. Not strength, not cunning, mercy. Valdric's face contorted. For a moment, Kalen thought he would demand death, would prefer a clean ending to the long humiliation being offered. But beneath the arrogance and the cruelty, Valdric was a coward. He had always been a coward. That was why he had worked from the shadows instead of facing his enemies directly. I choose to live. The words came through gritted teeth. Kalen stood. Then live. He turned to the assembled alphas. Valdric of Silver Fang is stripped of his title and his authority. He will be held in confinement for the remainder of his days, a living reminder of what happens to those who choose darkness over light. "And the pack?" one of the alphas asked. Darius stepped forward. He had not spoken since his father's attack. His face was pale but determined. "I will lead Silver Fang," his voice carried to every ear. "If the pack will have me, I cannot undo what my father has done, but I can spend the rest of my life trying to build something worthy of the trust I am asking for." The wolves of Silver Fang looked at each other. Many had suspected Valdric's corruption for years. Many had lost family members to his hidden purges. Many had prayed for exactly this moment. One by one they knelt. Darius closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet with tears but steady with resolve. The Confederation took shape over the following weeks. Not a single kingdom with a single ruler. That model had failed too many times. Instead, a council of alphas who would govern together, bound by shared principles rather than forced obedience. Power without mercy is tyranny. That was the first law, the foundation upon which everything else was built. Truth before comfort, the second law. Protection of the vulnerable, the third. Simple principles, difficult to practice. But the wolves who had witnessed Valdric's judgment understood why they mattered. They had seen where the alternative led. Kaelin and Alara did not claim crowns. They did not demand thrones. Instead, they offered guidance. When disputes arose, they helped mediate. When injustice occurred, they helped investigate. When wolves lost their way, they offered the chance for redemption. The valley remained their home. The Temple of First Wolves became a place of pilgrimage, where wolves from across the territories came to seek the Pathfinder's wisdom, or simply to see the proof that a different way of living was possible. Seraphina grew. She was 12 when she fully manifested her gift, 15 when she surpassed her mother's abilities. Her silver eyes saw deeper than any Pathfinder in recorded history. Her understanding of the threads approached the divine, but she remained at her core the daughter Kaelin had raised. Curious and kind and occasionally stubborn. She learned combat from Aldrich, who had grown old but refused to retire. She studied history with Brennan, who had somehow survived to see his 85th year despite every prediction to the contrary. She practiced leadership with Darius, who visited the valley often to consult with his former mentors. And she listened, every night before sleep, to her father's stories. Stories of failure and redemption, of mercy and justice, of the choices that defined who a person became. On her 15th birthday, Seraphina stood at the altar of the Temple of First Wolves. Before her knelt 300 young wolves from across the territories, the first generation to be raised entirely under the new laws, the first generation who had never known Valdric's darkness or the chaos that preceded the Confederation. "Do you swear?" Seraphina's voice carried the weight of her gift and the authority of her bloodline. "To protect those who cannot protect themselves?" "We swear," 300 voices in unison. "Do you swear to seek truth even when lies would be more comfortable?" "We swear." "Do you swear to remember that power is a gift meant for service, not domination? That mercy is not weakness but strength? That the measure of your worth is not what you destroy but what you build?" "We swear." "Then rise." Seraphina's silver eyes glowed with light that was not entirely her own. "Rise as guardians of a new age." They rose, and as they did, the temple filled with silver radiance. The goddess, blessing the ceremony, acknowledging that her chosen people had finally learned the lessons she had been trying to teach them for millennia. Kaelin watched from the back of the hall. He was 58 years old now. His hair had gone completely white. His face bore the lines of 15 years of leadership and service. His body ached in ways it had not when he was young, but his silver eyes were still sharp. And his heart, scarred and healed and scarred again, still beat with purpose. Alara stood beside him, her dark hair streaked with gray, her hand clasped in his as it had been for 15 years. "We did it." Her voice was soft, meant only for him. "You did it." He turned to look at her. "The goddess chose well when she sent you into my path. The goddess gave me a broken king who needed purpose." Alara smiled. "I simply helped him remember what he already knew." "And what was that?" "That redemption is not about erasing the past. It is about building a future worthy of the lessons that past has taught." Kaelin looked back at the hall, at his daughter, radiant with power and wisdom, at the young wolves who would carry the Confederation forward, at Aldrich and Brennan, ancient warriors who had lived to see their hopes realized, and at Darius, Alpha of Silver Fang, who had walked the same path of redemption and emerged as one of the finest leaders the territories had ever known. I used to believe that my greatest failure was the massacre. Kaelin spoke slowly. 3 years of exile because I could not forgive myself for 200 deaths. And now? Now I understand that my greatest failure would have been giving up, walking away permanently, letting the guilt destroy me instead of transform me. Alara squeezed his hand. The goddess knew. That is why she sent me, not to save you, to remind you that you were worth saving. The ceremony concluded. The young wolves dispersed into the valley, full of energy and purpose and the absolute certainty of youth that they would change the world. They would, Kaelin knew, not in the ways they expected, not without failures and setbacks and moments when everything seemed lost. But they would persist because they had been taught to persist. They would choose mercy because they had seen what mercy could build. They would seek truth because they had witnessed the cost of lies. And when they fell, as all people eventually fell, they would remember the stories. The king who murdered innocents and found redemption. The queen who was violated and rose to judgment. The daughter who carried divine power but remained human. The stories would sustain them, as stories always had. That evening, Kaelin sat with Seraphina on the steps of the temple, watching the sunset over the valley that had become their home. "Are you afraid?" Seraphina asked. "Of what comes after?" "After? You are 58 years old, Father. You have lived a full life, longer than many wolves ever see. Someday, perhaps not soon, but someday, you will not be here anymore." Kaelin considered the question. He had faced death many times over the years, had been prepared to die on more occasions than he could count. But this was different. This was the slow inevitability that came for everyone, regardless of power or position. "No," he finally answered, "I am not afraid." "Why not?" "Because I know what I leave behind." He gestured at the valley spread below them. The houses and workshops and training grounds, the wolves going about their evening routines, the lights beginning to flicker on as darkness gathered. "I know that everything I have built, everything we have built together, will continue after I am gone. That is not immortality. No, it is something better. Immortality would mean I never change, never grow, never make room for what comes next. This way, I become part of something larger, a single thread in a tapestry that stretches back to the first wolves and forward to the last." Seraphina was quiet for a moment. Then she leaned against him, her head on his shoulder, the way she had done when she was small, and the world seemed too large and frightening. "I love you, Father. I love you too, little moon, more than you will ever know." They sat together as the stars emerged, father and daughter, king and heir, 2 lives intertwined in a story that would be told for generations. And somewhere beyond the boundaries of mortal perception, the goddess watched and was content. Her children had finally learned. Power was not strength, cruelty was not justice, and redemption, hard-won and carefully maintained, was always possible for those willing to rise. The snow fell gently over the valley, just as it had fallen 15 years ago when a broken king found a pregnant stranger dying in a drift. But this snow carried no judgment, only the quiet promise of renewal. Spring would come. It always did. And with it, new growth, new chances, new stories waiting to be written. That was the gift the fallen king had given his people. Not a kingdom, not laws or territory or military strength, hope. And hope, Kaelin had learned, was the only power that truly lasted. Years later, travelers would speak of the Northern Confederation in hushed and reverent tones. They would tell stories of the king who had been broken and made whole, of the queen who had been cast out and crowned, of the daughter born under moonlight who united all the packs under a single truth. Power without compassion is no power at all. They would speak of the temple in the hidden valley, where wolves came from every territory to learn the old ways and the new wisdom. They would describe the silver light that sometimes filled the sky above the mountains, evidence that the goddess still watched over her chosen people. And they would tell the story of redemption itself, how a man who had ordered the deaths of innocents found his way back to the light, how a woman who had been violated and cast out rose to become a force for justice, how their love, forged in suffering and tempered by mercy, had changed the world. These were the stories that mattered, not tales of conquest or domination, not legends of warriors who never fell, but histories of those who fell hard, who lay broken in the snow of their own failures, and who somehow found the strength to rise again. The greatest stories are not about those who never fail. They are about those who fail and choose to rise anyway. Kalen Blackwood understood this now. He had lived it, and in living it, he had given his people something more valuable than any crown or kingdom. He had given them proof that it was possible, and that in the end was enough. End of part 3. The end.